no soap, those like aluminum foil blankets. Our clients refer to it as the ice box. They'll call it an ice box and hielera, because they keep it really, really cold, and they keep the lights on all the time. And you'll see cages, I think, in some images, and so our kids will like refer to that as like the dog pound or the dog cages. I don't know why there's I don't know what the cage is, but I think it's like they're supposed to be separating out like age groups and genders and stuff, but it's not supposed to be a permanent thing. But we're saying because of the influx and our country's kind of inability to address the need, and instead of maybe not detaining children or maybe building more nice shelters, instead they're just leaving them down at the border in these processing centers. Like I think there was, when I was in El Paso, I think the week before, there was an incident where they were holding families under the bridge, just out in the elements. Same situation. It was, they were trying to decide, do you go to a detention facility? Are you getting released to someone? Until they could figure out where these people were going, Customs and Border Patrol our Border Protection was just kind of holding them under bridges, in the cages, in the ice boxes with the really terrible conditions. And while family separation, it's funny because all these, not funny, but interesting that all these like different policies have come down through the administration, and they like start and then they end, and then they start and then they end. But when I was down in El Paso, what we saw was just mass chaos and confusion. It was like, no, family separation on the books isn't supposed to be happening, but then you'll have like a few rogue actors that are still separating families, and so we might still see some family separation from time to time. Or the new Remain in Mexico, I think it's like the MPP Migrant Protection Protocol, whatever, MPP, it's the Remain in Mexico is kind of the street name. So those are for people. They're saying, no, we're not going to detain you here. We don't have room for you here. We're going to process you in the processing center in these cages and ice boxes, and then we're going to push you back over to Mexico, and you're going to wait there until your hearing date, which could be years down the road. And the thing is, when we were in El Paso and in Ciudad Juarez, there was one Catholic-run shelter that was housing some of the people, but the sheer masses of people, like they can't all fit into this poor shelter, so they're just on the streets. And Mexico has a lot of the same problems that people from Central America are fleeing, and so it's also not safe, and you have people in the elements, and it's difficult to access attorneys because it's U.S. attorneys here in the U.S., but you have people in Mexico. If they're in the shelter, apparently, from what I heard, they were not allowed to have cell phones for safety reasons. If you don't have a cell phone, how are you going to call an attorney? If you do have an attorney in the U.S., how's that attorney going to contact you? Apparently, the courts were using the address of this one shelter to send all the court notices, the hearing notices for people, but the people aren't even at the shelter. They're like out in the streets, so how are the people going to know like that they need to show up at this port of entry at this place in time to get put into a bus and bus to their hearing? When we were there was a group of women, pregnant women, and one woman had, I think it was like a 7-day-old baby, and they were supposed to meet at this port of entry and be bussed across to their hearing in the El Paso Immigration Court, and they were picked up, they were bussed across, and then the judge was waiting in court, the trial attorney's waiting in court, the attorney from Las Americas, the nonprofit that was representing the women, or was going to represent the women, was waiting in court, and they never showed up. So the enforcement and removal bus that had driven them, it's like all these moving parts of kind of the same agency. The bus that had driven them to the U.S. never got to the court. No one knew where they were. They thought maybe they might be in one of these processing centers, but they don't know which processing center, and no one had any record. And then the baby was apparently separated from the mom, and no one knew where the baby was. And it was madness, and having that attorney come back, that's how I found out, because the Las Americas attorney came back to the office, and she was like, well, this crazy thing happened, and I guess I'm going to be spending the rest of the day trying to like locate a 7-day-old baby and these women, these pregnant women, and like where are they, and what. She was like, some government entity has them, but like which one, and it's so dysfunctional that it's like one, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. Like no one knows where they are, and how and why was the Remain in Mexico policy enforced against these women, but you have others that are in detention centers, or some that are just kind of what they call catch and release, like fingerprinted and then released. And able to kind of like travel to other parts, like say here to Pennsylvania where they have relatives or something, and pursue their case here. Why are these policies being implemented? There was just kind of like willy-nilly. There was no rhyme or reason. It was just kind of like, well, these people came in contact with this officer, so this officer's returning them to Mexico because of the Remain in Mexico policy, but then this officer's using like a separation of families policy, and this one's doing this or that. It was just all over the place, and the fact that attorneys didn't know where their clients were, and the ICE attorneys didn't know where people were, and the judges didn't know where people were, and it was just kind of, it's like madness. One of the attorneys at Las Americas kind of described the situation as quicksand. She was like, I feel like we're working in quicksand. Like you feel like you can just never get ahead of it because things are changing all the time. And once you figure out one thing, it's like some other crisis pops up, and it's all these manufactured crises that are having like real world like impact on real people that are. They're in trauma, like they've suffered a lot, and the fact that people are kind of like, well, they know like if they're going to be separated from their family, why are they coming anyway? It's because the conditions in their home country are so terrible that they'd rather risk it, and the fact that being separated, having a mother and a child like separated is a better result than if they had remained in their country. Like that just speaks volumes to what's actually going on from what they're fleeing.
Did they find the baby?
I don't know. It was kind of on one of our last days, so we were like, oh
gosh.
I don't know. I hope they did.
What would you say to the people who complain because they say, well, I had to wait all this time and pay all this extra money to be able to get a visa and then a green card and all these things, and then there are just people walking and getting work authorization, and it's faster the process. What would you tell them?
I don't know if it's faster the process.
Yeah,
I know. I hear that. I hear that too. I have people I know. They're like, well, I immigrated from Canada and we had to pay all this money
and wait.
And I'm like, okay, well, like you were.
Waited 2 years.
Yeah, like you're like you were privileged enough to like be able to come that way and file all the paperwork and have the money and the resource to do that. Like the people that we're seeing now, they don't have that option. Like they're fleeing such extreme violence, and I don't really think maybe it seems to other people like, oh, I've waited and I've done it the right way, but
I paid this,
it's definitely not. I mean, it's definitely not easy, and it's not like you're just going to cross the border and automatically win asylum. Like, just getting here is one challenge, and then another small victory is like you didn't get detained and your family unit's still intact, and then how are you going to pay for that attorney if you even get an attorney? I mean, we do see people try and represent themselves. Go pro se and represent themselves in asylum, but if you don't speak the language, attorneys that don't even practice immigration law, if you hand them an asylum application, it's confusing for them. Yeah.
Where do these attorneys come from? I mean, are people going down and volunteering? Is that what's going on?
There are groups going down and volunteering. So there's a bunch of organizations already on the border, a bunch of nonprofits. So you have places like Las Americas, Dialysis Migrant Refugee Services in El Paso. You have Raíces is in Texas as well. I don't know where. You have Florence Project in Arizona. There's places in California. Al Otro Lado is working with people on both sides. In Tijuana and in San Diego, so they kind of have people on both sides. But there are a lot of nonprofits. There are a lot of people that are a lot of groups that are sending pro bono attorneys to work with the different already existing organizations. Heavy emphasis on Spanish speakers.
Right.
And also, while the people on the border, yes, they're like on the front lines and they're seeing the people right as they come in, if they are able to, like, so when we were in El Paso, the main strategy of Las Americas, if people were detained, was to just get them out on bond and get them out of there, because if there's a 7% grant rate, like, you don't want to be there. Their advice was to, like, get out of here. If you're not detained, or if you're able to get out of detention, like, get out of here, like, come to places like New York and Philadelphia, or different cities in California, like, just get out of there and go to a friendlier jurisdiction and get an attorney there. So, like, organizations like ours.
It seems like the United States is such a big country, 300 million people, that we should be able to absorb a significant number of immigrants. I mean, when you look at what's happened in Europe with the refugees from the Middle East, I mean, there it's, you know, it's massive, and compared to that, it's very small here, you know? I mean, if they were dispersed throughout this country, it would not be a problem.
And I can give you some numbers. I pulled these, like, straight from the Customs and Border Protection website, because they keep track. So actually, 2014, for whatever reason, 2014, there was probably something going on in the world. There was a peak in kind of Central American migration to the U.S., the unaccompanied minors. It was kind of the first time unaccompanied minors peaked, and some of these regulations were formed, and then families. So in 2014, in the month of May, there were about 11,000 unaccompanied minors and about 13,000 families. But then the numbers dropped. Like, that was the highest that it was. And then even last year in 2018, where Trump was like, there's a crisis and all these people are coming, the numbers were still, it was still only like 6,000 kids and 9,000 families versus the, like, 11 and 13 from before. So the numbers were down. And then for 2019, the numbers have peaked again. So despite all of these inhumane tactics to kind of deter people, there's still about 11,000 unaccompanied minors, but where we've seen the real peak are family units. In the month of May this year, so just last month, there are about 85,000 families. That's like a huge peak. That's like a huge jump from what it was at the highest peak in 2014. In the month of May, there was only 13,000 family units. And so for this past month to be 85,000 family units, it is a lot. So yeah, the numbers are up right now. They have not been up in the past. They are currently up. But I think it's kind of like a multi-layer in addressing it. Like, we need to address it on internally on our end, but we also need, I think, to give aid and help work with the Central American countries to address that, because
They're up because they're frightened that Trump will close the border? Is that the future?
No, I actually don't think so. I think the situations have just gotten worse. Like, we've seen spikes in death tolls.
Gotten worse in Honduras and Salvador?
In Honduras and El Salvador. In Guatemala, it's primarily, I would say, poverty-driven, just extreme poverty. I mean, there is some gang, but I would say Guatemala is extreme poverty. But when we're seeing people from Honduras and El Salvador, it's mostly gang. It's gang-based because it's just out of control. And, you know, if you go back to the 80s, the U.S. had a role in that as well.
There were record levels of deportation during the Obama administration.
Yes, we used to call Obama the deporter-in-chief. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that administration didn't act as a pressure relief valve for this time period, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, we weren't taking in people, we were deporting them, and then that creates kind of a built-up demand for
People come.
immigrants.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it's hard to say. It's probably just a whole bunch of things working together. I honestly, like, don't know why suddenly, like, we're at the point where we're at now. It seems more extreme right now just because of how we're, like, handling it and our treatment of people on our end. But it is, no one, when we talk policy, like, no one, the U.S. is never really interested in these, what we call push factors, like, why are that they're not just coming to, like, steal our jobs and, like, get all the handouts, which they can't get anyway. So it's honestly the conditions down there, and I don't know how to solve that.
Do you think one of the reasons might be because before, people were coming in and out of the country, like they will come for, 6 years or whatever amount of time, and then they will leave, and then they will come back. Do you think it's because now almost, people are getting cut, or because we have more officers?
I think it's like the laws are more severe, so like there's a cutback on like guest worker visa, because a lot of people just want to like come work and go back, come work, and so there's the guest worker visas, which I don't know a lot about, like employment stuff, and yeah, I think some of the crackdown on harsher laws, like it's harder to travel back and forth, so you've got to make the decision to either stay or come permanently, and so maybe that's why we're seeing like more family units come, because it's getting more and more difficult to maybe like send a person and then like petition for family members later.
Well, the wait time for...
Wait times are up.
Visas are insane.
It's ridiculous.
Wait
Like
time for even employment-based visas is insane right now.
you won't see, yeah, like even if you have like say like a parent come and then by the time they get status and everything and then petition for say like a child, like it's not a child anymore.
Yeah.
It's,
And it could be 20 years.
yeah. Yeah.
Best case.
Yeah, everything's just so backlogged. Everything's so backlogged. Like, it's ridiculous. I mean, and for the asylum too, like they're going faster now for the people.
File latest.
Yeah, it's like last in, first out. So like I have kids that I applied for in say like 2017. Who knows how long they're going to be waiting. Like they're waiting for interviews, they're waiting for their cases to be adjudicated and decided. But then I have people that come like right now and it's like, a couple months like turnover. While the old cases are just sitting out there.
So you're talking about bonds before, trying to get them bonded out and then go to more hospitable places. I think yesterday I saw a list of organizations that have bonds funds for that. And there's some that are just general, like the American Bar Association that has a bonds fund. But are there ones specific for immigration, and is that an actionable way that people can help?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I can't pay the immigrant bond. I don't have
Right.
$8,000 in my pocket. But if I contribute to one of these groups, is that a real way to help kids?
Absolutely. That's a good point. So I did bring I made up these little take action sheets. I can pass them around. I did not include bond on there. I listed some. So in my opinion, from what I've seen, and especially going down there with the pro bonos and seeing what they did and didn't do, because immigration is such a complex field, and you need such training. I know a lot of people are I'm an attorney and I want to go help, but really the biggest help is donating to the organizations that are doing the work. So I put some on there that were in El Paso. Donating, you can donate, I think frequent flyer miles or just money into this Miles for Migrants to once they get out on bond, because how are they going to get out of El Paso to pay for their bus or plane flights?
But I guess I wonder whether
there are bond
people
funds.
have heard of Rises and their Facebook fundraisers are going.
Rises is fundraising money like crazy,
right,
yeah.
But I mean, I guess I could figure out the answer to this myself, but are they focused on, legal defense, and then the money isn't actually being allocated for their bonds?
No, I think it's actually, if it's a donate, so for Rises, if you're donating and it's saying it's for a bond fund, it really is going for a bond. I did not look this up before coming, but I'm sure you could do a quick internet search and see where to donate for bond. I try to look and see if it's connected with a legitimate organization. If it's something through Rises, it's going to be fine. Or one of the legal service providers.
Would they do bond plus motion to change venue, or just the bond?
They would do it. I mean, they would do it. They would do the bond first, and then I think then the person would decide. Unless sometimes you get the bond. I guess it depends what the person's circumstance. If they already know, I'm coming to Philadelphia, or they already have a plan in place, then they might just do it all together. But
so the organization will pay for the bond plus the motion to change venue.
the motion is free, so the attorney would just do it if there was an attorney on it. Most cases that get referred over here, someone will do it. It's either the attorney that had the case Like say if they started off in Texas, that attorney will do it, or if they came here to Philadelphia and we noticed that it hasn't been done yet, then, and Highest picked it up, then we would just do it.
It's probably like sort of a patchwork of who's paying for what. So like one
Yeah.
organization might pay for the bonds, but then, you know, the Highest or, you know, Nationality Service Center, somebody else picks up the, you know, the more substantive legal work, and so then maybe it's that organization's funds that are going, you know,
Right.
towards the change of venue or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So while I know like the organization on the border are getting a lot of funds right now, and they definitely do need it because they are just inundated and overwhelmed. Places like Highest are here, and while we're not at the border, we're still seeing an influx because anyone that can get out of, say, inhospitable jurisdictions like El Paso are coming. A lot of people
Oh,
come
and we're gonna
north.
bus them here, right? It's funny.
But yeah, they go on the Greyhound. They take like a really long Greyhound
Yeah.
and make like a ton of stops, and they end up here. And sometimes, if we've picked, I know a friend of friends of farm workers. Like she knew her client was getting out of detention and like met him down at the Greyhound station right down the street here. So. Yeah, if it says it's for a bond fund, Highest usually doesn't have one. Like sometimes we might fundraise if different organizations might fundraise. Like if you're working with a specific client and they knew that that person needs a bond and they don't have the funds to raise it, they might just do like a very discreet, like this specific person fundraise. And then you might have larger organizations like Raices that are maybe taking up a pool of money that they're using when needed. I think for a while places, well, I know that the Miles for Migrants, like they were using that to help reunify families. So like if a kid was separated and detained in a shelter in one state and the parent was detained in another state and then they both got out, like flying them to wherever they need to be. So I know you can donate frequent flyer miles, you can donate money for that. I put on the list, there's an organization called Annunciation House. They are fantastic. They're just in El Paso, but when people get out on bond and they're in El Paso, but they don't know where they're going yet, or it's like they're just dumped on the street. They can go to an Annunciation House, they can get a bed, they can get a warm meal. Annunciation House will help them, or like book their bus ticket or their plane flight, or connect with family members and help raise that money. So they're an awesome organization to donate to, and also people who have like physical, like tangible items, like clothes and toys and things, like because we get a lot of requests like that at Highest because we work with the
Nationalities
does that as well. And we get a lot of requests at Highest since we have the youth team and we work with a lot of youth, and people are always trying to like give things, and we don't really have a storage space for like actual things, and it's more of like, oh, one client might be requesting like a car seat or a baby stroller, but we don't have like the capacity to like take like a ton of car seats and baby
So I don't know
strollers.
about Highest, but I know I donated to Nationality Service and those Amazon wish lists.
Yes,
So like
yes.
if you go to like their website or their Facebook, they'll be like, we have an influx of like, or you know, we're expecting a couple of refugee families and we're furnishing like their houses, and these are the things we need for it.
Yeah.
So it's like blankets, sheets, pots, and pans.
And Highest does the same thing too. Ours is an Amazon, or is it Target? I think we have an Amazon wish list too, and it's usually things like diapers and like different
Yeah, but this is for families that have come here. Though.
that are
This is-
come that end up here.
Are you going back to border? Is anyone from Highest going back?
Not right now, not in the near future. Perhaps later. What we saw when we were down there was, because we were trying to weigh like how helpful were we really, like we came with like 7 pro bonos, and then me and my colleague, did we really like help Las Americas? Like was our presence there like more of a burden? Because a lot of people like have very good intentions and want to help, but like how much, it's kind of what we were analyzing afterwards. And that's why I'm saying like monetary donations are very much, it's not what people want to hear, but it's very much appreciated. And if you do have Spanish language skills, whether you're an attorney or not, like that is useful if you're looking to volunteer, because you can always help with intake. And then as an attorney, again, Spanish language is like kind of a must. And unless you're really like a trained immigration attorney who's working on these removal defense cases in your regular practice, it's such a specialized area of law. It's really difficult for someone to be like, oh, like I do corporate law or contracts or something, but I'm like, by heart, I just want to help. It's I don't know how, I don't know, I feel like it's almost like more burdensome because then the organization has to like figure out what to do with all these people and how to like use your skills that may not be the skill set they need. And so that's why, I know it's not what people want to hear because they want to like do something, but really the best thing you can do is to donate, to like spread the word about organizations and kind of about the situation at the border and what's going on, and to write your representatives. It's really like write your
So
representatives, call
essentially,
your representatives.
HIAS kicks in if you can get people out of El Paso. That's
Yes, we only
essentially
represent Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
yes. And
When, if you can get them here, then you all
yes,
kick in.
we will represent
Yeah.
them. I mean, not everyone because we have limited capacity, but those that we have the capacity to take, yes, we will
Now,
represent.
how does HIAS get funded? I mean,
There's multiple ways. We have
if you've got 70 attorneys, I mean, that's not...
private donation. We have a lot of federal, we have a lot of government grants, state grants, city grants, private grants. We did kind of, with the new administration, lose some federal funding, and there was fear that we would have to downsize, but the silver lining in it all is that the work that we do and the plight of our clients kind of made it to the forefront of the media, and so people felt so inclined to donate, and so because of that, we've actually grown, and so a lot of it is private donations, but we do have a lot of grants from various funding sources. My position is totally funded by private donations, so I have no reporting requirements, or I'm not beholden to any grant. But for most in the office, they might be kind of like puzzle pieced together through different funding sources and grants.
So the way it was, we've had some asylum cases here, and I actually have been involved in a little bit. But the way it was before is everybody, according to international law, everybody who applied for asylum had to come to the United States, and then there was a 2-year period in which they investigated to see, in fact, if they were candidates. And then there would be a trial here, and that's where it's been broken down now. It's been broken down in, a couple of weeks, where they actually go to somebody who's not even a lawyer.
Yes, so these asylum officers
who's been
aren't
called
even
a
lawyers.
judge, who makes the decision.
Yeah.
So it's really,
It's awful.
it's violating, isn't it violating international law, asylum?
Human rights, the whole
Human
thing.
law.
Yeah.
How the process is now, there's some violations basically on, the violations come more down into like how people are detained and treated, so there's kind of different safeguards for child applicants that are being chipped away, so there's some violations there. I don't know if I would say like the speed of things are a violation. It just is a complicating factor. It makes it a little bit more difficult, but and the asylum officers are trained. They are trained. A lot of them are attorneys, but there's also a lot that aren't attorneys. They're just trained government workers. The judges are all attorneys.
Oh, they're all attorneys.
The judges are, I mean, maybe they don't have to be. I'm not sure on that. All of our judges here are attorneys, and for the most part, I don't know. I mean, I'm not aware of any judges that like weren't attorneys before becoming a judge, but it might be possible. I would like to hope that like on the job application, there's like some form of immigration experience and a lawyer capacity that's needed. I don't know. I think whether it's a requirement or not, I'm pretty sure all the judges are attorneys. It's just the fact that they're appointed. Now, the asylum officers that are running kind of first step like credible fear interviews or adjudicating cases that are at the asylum office instead of court, because there's kind of 2 ways you can go, in front of a judge or in front of an asylum officer. The officers are not all attorneys, no. They're trained. How good that training is, I don't know. And if you get denied at asylum office or in front of an asylum officer, the appeal process is then you're like referred to court in front of the immigration judge. It just, makes the whole process take even longer. I know like here in Philadelphia are like hearing dates for asylum for,
2023.
yeah, like, yeah, I think,